The bedroom door flew open, slamming against the wall so hard that I flinched. My heart stopped for a second before it started pounding in my chest, loud enough to drown out everything else. I turned my head, breath caught in my throat. He was standing there. My husband. But he wasn't looking at me. His eyes were locked on the man beside me. I felt the heat radiating from his presence, the way the air in the room had shifted, thick with tension, with something suffocating. My driver stood frozen, his breathing still unsteady as if he had just run a mile. We were too close. Too damn close. I could feel the electricity between us, the one that had been there for weeks, the one I had convinced myself wasn't real. And then my husband finally spoke. "I know everything." 4 words. No yelling, no anger, no accusations. Just a calm, terrifying certainty that sent ice through my veins. I opened my mouth but nothing came out. The weight of my own guilt choked me. But what I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that the worst part hadn't even begun yet. I had no idea just how much he really knew. And I had no idea what was coming next. A week ago, my husband left for another business trip. He kissed me quickly, barely letting his lips touch mine, the way people do when something has long lost its meaning. No warmth, no hesitation, just routine. I stood there watching him disappear through the front door, suitcase in hand, already dialing someone on his phone before he even reached the car. I knew how this would go. Days of silence, occasional text messages, a lifeless "miss you" that he didn't mean. The loneliness didn't surprise me anymore, but this time, something felt different. As I stepped outside, my driver was waiting, holding the car door open. His fingers brushed against mine as I slid inside. Just a fraction of a second, barely there, but it sent an unfamiliar jolt up my spine. I glanced at him through the mirror, noticing the sharpness in his gaze, the way his jaw tensed before he looked away. It was the first time I really saw him not just as my driver but as a man. And for the first time in years I felt something shift inside me. The restaurant was warm, filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and the hum of conversations blending into a comforting noise. My friend leaned in, her eyes sharp, her lips curling into a knowing smirk as she swirled the last of her wine. "You've changed," she said, tilting her head. "Do you have someone?" The question sent a jolt through me, my fingers tightening around my glass. I forced a laugh, shaking my head, but my throat felt dry. I wasn't sure if I was lying or just afraid of the truth. Outside, the night air was crisp, the city buzzing softly in the distance. He was waiting by the car, leaning against the door with that quiet confidence, watching me in a way that made my pulse quicken. I should have gone home. I should have looked away. Instead I hesitated. 1 second too long. The car was dark, intimate, silent except for our breaths. The air between us grew thick, charged. His eyes locked onto mine, filled with something I hadn't felt in years. When he leaned in, I didn't stop him. His lips met mine just for a moment, but it was enough to set everything on fire. I had no idea this was the moment that would ruin me. I told myself it was nothing. A mistake. A lapse in judgment, fueled by wine and loneliness. I spent the next morning convincing myself that it meant nothing, that I could move on like it never happened. But when I slid into the back seat, everything felt different. He didn't say a word, but his eyes met mine in the mirror, and there was something there. Something bold, something knowing. He wasn't just my driver anymore. He was waiting. Testing me. I looked away, pretending not to notice, but my pulse betrayed me. Every time he opened the door, every time his hand brushed too close, my skin burned. I avoided his gaze, but I could feel it on me. Watching. Waiting. My phone rang, snapping me out of my thoughts. My husband. His voice was warm, softer than usual. "I miss you," he said. My fingers tightened around the phone, my breath caught. I should have said it back, but my throat felt tight. My hands were shaking. Because the truth was, I didn't know if I missed him at all. And that terrified me more than anything. I wasn't expecting him home. The sound of his keys rattling in the door sent a shock through me, my body stiffening as I turned. He walked in with a tired smile, setting his suitcase down, his eyes softer than I remembered. "Surprise," he said, stepping closer, his hands finding my waist. I forced a smile, my heart hammering against my ribs. His lips met mine, slow, warm, familiar. I should have melted into it, should have felt the comfort of the man I once loved. Instead, all I felt was emptiness. A dull, aching void swallowing me whole. My stomach twisted as he pulled away, his fingers lingering on my cheek. I missed you, he murmured. The words made my chest tighten, not with love but with guilt. That night as he slept beside me, my phone vibrated on the nightstand. One message. We both know this wasn't just a mistake. My breath caught, fingers trembling as I locked the screen. I wanted to believe I could stop this, that I could fix what was broken. But deep down I knew it was already too late. Her eyes were locked on me, unblinking, sharp. I shifted under her gaze, forcing a laugh, but it came out hollow. She swirled her drink, studying me like a puzzle she was close to solving. You're acting weird, she said, her voice low, deliberate. Don't do something stupid. My stomach twisted. I opened my mouth to protest, to brush it off with some half-hearted excuse, but I saw it in her face. She already knew something was wrong. That night, every moment with him felt heavier. Every silence too thick, every glance too long. In the car he didn't speak at first, but his presence filled the space, charged, suffocating. His hand gripped the steering wheel tighter than usual, his jaw clenched. When we hit a red light he turned, his eyes dark, burning. He didn't need to say it. I felt it. The waiting was over. He wasn't holding back anymore. My breath caught as heat crawled up my neck. I should have looked away, should have ended this before it was too late. But I didn't. And I knew I was already trapped. The message came in the afternoon. Simple. Direct. Tonight. Your place. My fingers hovered over the screen, my pulse quickening. I should have ignored it. I should have deleted it. Instead I typed a single word. Yes. The moment I sent it, a shiver ran through me, half fear, half anticipation. Hours passed in a blur. My husband had left that morning, another business trip, another empty house. I told myself I could still change my mind, that nothing had to happen. But when I heard the knock at the door I knew, I wasn't stopping this. The second I opened it, the air between us shifted. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him, the space shrinking, pulling us together. The apartment felt unfamiliar, like I wasn't really there, like this wasn't really happening. But it was. His eyes locked onto mine, dark and certain, no hesitation, no doubt. I could feel the heat radiating off him, the electricity crackling in the silence. My heart pounded, my breathing shallow. I had crossed the line, and there was no way back. The air was thick, electric, the weight of what I had done pressing down on me. The room smelled like wine, expensive perfume, and something else. Something dangerous. I was still trying to catch my breath, still trying to convince myself that this was real and not some fever dream. Then I heard it. A sound. Soft, barely there, but enough to send ice through my veins. A creak. The unmistakable shift of weight against the wooden floor just outside the room. I went still. My driver's gaze flicked toward the door. He heard it too. The world slowed, each second stretching into eternity. The handle turned. My stomach dropped. The door flew open. She stood there. My best friend. Her face unreadable, her expression carefully blank. But her silence said everything. I felt my mouth open, but no words came out. I saw the way her gaze swept over us, taking in every single damning detail. The heat in the room. The proximity. The undeniable. She exhaled sharply. I warned you, she said, her voice calm, almost bored. That was the worst part. Not anger. Not shock. Just quiet, knowing disappointment. But the worst was yet to come. I just didn't know it yet. I don't know how he found out. Maybe my friend told him. Maybe he had known all along, just waiting for me to confess. But when I walked into the house that night, he was already there. Sitting in the dimly lit living room, his phone in his hand, his face unreadable. My heart slammed against my ribs. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. He looked at me, no anger, no accusation, just a heavy, suffocating silence. That was worse than yelling. Worse than rage. His eyes held something colder. Resignation. Disgust. The weight of knowing I had destroyed something that could never be repaired. I took a step forward, but he stood up, walked past me, and disappeared into the bedroom. The door closed softly. The finality of it crushed me. The next day my driver was gone. No messages. No explanations. Like he had never existed. I called my friend. Voicemail. Texted. No response. I tried again. Nothing. I had lost them all. And I had no one to blame but myself. The house felt different. As if something vital had been stripped away. I walked through the rooms, my footsteps echoing against the cold floors. His clothes were gone. His suitcase. his watch from the nightstand. The framed photos that once lined the shelves had vanished, leaving behind faint dust outlines where they used to be. I stood in the bedroom, staring at the unmade bed, at the space he used to occupy, at the silence he left behind. My throat burned. I reached for my phone, instinctively scrolling through old messages, searching for something that no longer existed. Outside, the car was parked in its usual spot. But I was the only one in it now. No driver waiting by the door. No glances in the mirror. No stolen moments. Just me. Alone. I gripped the wheel, but I had nowhere to go. Nowhere to run. The life I had built was gone, slipping through my fingers like sand. I had crossed the line thinking I could have it all. Instead, I lost everything. And I had no one to blame but myself.